Nation in Conversation, proudly brought to you by Afgreen, Fort Knox, Hinterland, Monsanto, Nedbank, NWK and Senders. There are two spiritual dangers in not owning a farm. One is the danger of supposing that breakfast comes from the grocer, and the other that heat comes from the furnace.
Good day, this is Nation in Conversation. I'm Theo Foster. Nation in Conversation is your partner in dialogue. We share knowledge and insight. We welcome you to today's discussion. The vast majority of food in South Africa is sold by a handful of large retail chains. We look at the impact of this on the consumer, on the food value chain, and on the producers. You can follow us on Twitter at Nation Converse or visit the website nationinconversation.co.za. Joining me in the studio today is Tabi Nkosi, Senior Economist at Agri SA, and Kobus Pinaar, Technical Manager, Farming for the Future at Woolworths. Tabi, I want to start with you. We have a food value chain. On the one hand, these are retailers, where we buy our food. And right at the beginning, we have the producer. To what extent is that value chain impacted by the fact that we have a few very large retail chains dominating the retail side of the food market?
I think the dominance in the retail sector is quite significant because ultimately retailers are how the consumer experiences the whole food value chain. So, the consumer does not have an insight into what goes on in the value chain other than what goes on with retailers. Also, a lot of consumers spend a significant amount of their income on food. I mean, statistics show that the lowest percentile spend about 40% of their income on food. So it's quite a big issue. But I think the dominance of those role players in the retail space is not necessarily a bad thing, as long as there are sustainable business practices, and of course, as long as prices are not necessarily distorted by that dominance. So you still need that competitiveness because consumers still need to get value for money at the end of the day.
Is there advantages in having big players in the value chain?
There's definitely advantages, but the bigger you are, the bigger is your responsibility. And I agree with Tabi that you need to be focusing on sustainability, the bigger you are, and it will be for your own good as well.
If I take the consumer, and in your case, your consumer is more of the top end of the market, it is not necessarily as price sensitive. Your consumer places additional demands on what they want before they make that purchasing decision.
Definitely. We not known as being the cheapest in the country. But price is only one of the many things that our consumer is looking for. So, but what they want from us is they're demanding that we produce food in such a way that it is not negative to the environment. The human and social factor in the whole chain where we purchase from and farmers that we work for is important to them, as well as their own safety and health. They're very cautious about what food they eat because if you read in the press, there's a lot of food scares going on, and that's quite high on their agenda.
To what extent are they demanding a closer link between them and the farmer, where the food comes from?
Well, the whole issue around transparency is becoming more and more of a focus, if I can say that, is that the producer needs to prove to the consumer that how they produce the food is in the way that the consumer likes it. But the consumer also want to know where the food comes from. There's examples of where consumers know the producer of the apple or the potato, and they quite like it. They put a high value to that. So it's getting connected to where your food comes from and how it's grown is more the issue.
Where does if one looks at the spaza shops, which is also a distribution infrastructure, where do they fit into this whole system?
I think historically, looking at the history of our country, spaza shops have really been the backbone of township industries. And unfortunately, or maybe not unfortunately, but you have a lot of influx in terms of your big retailers into the township space, which is really starting to offer competition to spaza shops, meaning that, you know, spaza shops now need to start looking at ways in which they differentiate themselves, in which they add more value to the consumer. And really for those enterprises start look at, you know, should that be the business that they are in fact involved in? So I think it adds a very interesting dynamic. But at the end of the day, as long as the consumer benefits, I think it's a win-win for everyone.
Can you see the spaza shops transforming themselves to be able to compete against the big retail store in the big mall?
Honestly, I don't think so. I think these days retailers have a lot to comply with in terms of your food safety standards, as Kobus alluded to, in terms of your ethical practices, in terms of so many things that they need to comply with. And it is much easier as a bigger role player to start to incorporate those things and to comply. So it does make it very difficult for your smaller consumers to really comply and to really take advantage of the type of value that can be added through those things.
What's the role of volume in the retail space?
Volume obviously is making it easier to make profits. I mean, that's a normal economic sum that you can make there. If you don't have volume, we do pay X% of lease to the owners of the malls. So if your shelves is empty, it's a loss. So volume is got a big impact on the margin that you need to ask for. So if you don't have volume as a big retailer, you're definitely going to be out of business. So it's a critical thing that you need to get in place.
And how does that interact with, let's say, the fresh produce market versus a direct relationship with a producer?
Because of the pressures that Darby alluded on, is that we need to prove food safety. We need to prove that we do ethical sourcing and that social standards on our producers' farms and factories is in place. Is that it is very difficult to go through multiple stages in the chain. So to make it easier for us in Woolworths, we prefer to go directly to the producer on the farm to make sure that the chain is as short as possible. So direct from the farm to our stores.
That's from a business point of view, but that's also in line with the demand from your customer.
That's correct, yeah, to bring them closer to the farm or closer to where we produce. So, and it's the only way we see currently how we can be transparent to our clients. When you go through multiple stages, it's very difficult to be transparent.
After the break, I would like to talk about the role of the government in the structure, in the value chain, but then also about future demands and where are we looking at and what is happening. We'll be back shortly after the break. Welcome back to Nation in Conversation. Today we talk about retailers and the relationship between retailers and producers. Darby, if we look at the retail space and you look at the producer and you look at the link between them and the customer, what should the role of government be?
I think the role of government is quite important because government as the lawmaker essentially sets the rules of the game. I think government needs to come to the fore in terms of ensuring that there is sound competitiveness within the retail space so that everyone benefits in the value chain. I think it's important that the smaller players in the value chain are also protected and looked after to ensure that there is sustainability of supply, and that is a role of government. What we have seen is that your smaller farmers tend to be almost left out in the food value chain, in the sense that big retailers don't want to incur those high transaction costs of transacting with small little bit of farmers. So I think government support in terms of allowing those smaller farmers to group together, to take advantage of economies of scale, to have better bargaining power would be quite helpful.
What can the government do to assist the value chain in terms of the link between the producer, the quality, and the retailer?
See, first, you need to produce the quality product before we're interested. If there's no product, it's very difficult for us to engage. And that's where I believe is if the government can reinstate our Agriculture Research Council, and what flows out of that is expertise and extension to those farmers to make them more lucrative for a retailer like ourselves. I don't think that the smaller farmer will be excluded. But the problem is at this stage is smaller growers, it's very difficult for them almost conform to our requirements, as you alluded. So small transactions in the new IT age is not that big problem. It is a matter of getting the product there at the right time and at the right quality. And I think that the government can play a big role in that. We've got fantastic legislation to help the guys going there. We just need to enforce it.
And the role of inspections and audits?
The roles of inspection and audits, if we can have for the producer side, have one standard with one audit, and all the retailers that purchase from our suppliers are happy with that, that will be the ultimate. It will not only save costs, which is ultimately added to the product price for our consumer, but it will also save a lot of time.
Darby, you talked about new producers entering into the market. If one of the principles of the market is volume, a retailer needs volume, it needs consistent volume over long periods of time. That's why me and you go there and we buy the stuff. We know we get quality stuff over the long term and it's always there. How can government assist the broadening of the base of producers to the retailers?
I think it really starts at the farm. It really starts, I mean, if we are looking at, say, primary production and going there in the value chain, it really starts with empowering the farmer and, as Cobus has alluded to, extension services, allowing for production to happen. I think it's quite easy to mention that farming is a very risky business, and so that continuity of supply is very difficult. And I think extension services and support and research is really what's needed to empower the producer to really start to play a major role there.
And from your point of view, do you find from a social aspect there is a demand or pressure put on you by your customer to make sure that your producer adheres to social, to proper labor relationships, to empower his workers? Do you play a role in that space?
Definitely. It's at the end of the day, it's the right thing to do. To ensure that all the people in that chain has got their fair share of the business, from the person that sweep the packhouse floor to the one that do the marketing, or even the owner or the manager of that packhouse. Our consumers is definitely demanding it. Social aspects is one of the big things. It's about ethical sourcing. Do we work in a way that we sell food that cares to our consumers, and I do demand it, definitely.
You are in a space where, as we noted earlier, where it's more about quality and having to earn that premium. So therefore, your consumer is a consumer that takes a different view and perhaps have an easier choice to make when it comes to buying food. In terms of biotechnology and the usage of that, what is your position regarding that?
In terms of biotechnology, you've got the two, you can say, extremes. You've got people that is doom and gloom about it and say it's going to be bad for your health, bad for the environment, bad for social conditions. And obviously you've got your big corporates that is selling the products and manufacturing and developing them. Our position at this stage is, until there's clear proof that it is or good or bad, it's difficult for us to make a decision. So we're going to definitely reduce the amount of genetically modified organisms that's on our shelves. And those that we cannot take out, we will label so the customer can make an informed decision. But at this stage, until there's sound proof, we cannot boost the genetically modified products.
We're talking about labels. Do you foresee that the role of labels will become more important as we go on?
Definitely. Consumers, and especially our customers, they need to know what's in the product. They need to know what's the ingredients. There's allergens that play a role. There's obviously the sell-by date and the use-by date that plays a role for them. So they want to have as much information as they can readily when they pick up the product. So it's not only the label on the product itself, but also how you put your label on your website so they can do research.
Darby, we talked about what's on the label. If you are a consumer and price is very important to you, you make your decision on price, is it important what information is on that label?
Absolutely, perhaps not as important as the consumers of your more higher end products, but certainly everyone wants safe food. Everyone wants food that is not going to negatively affect the environment. So I think they are quite sensitive to it because everyone wants that.
Do you think there's enough information currently?
No, not at all. I think in terms of your nutritional value, in terms of the sugar and the salt, that is quite there. But I think we still have a long way to go in terms of how the food is sourced. Is there ethical sourcing? Was genetically modified food used in the product? So I think we still have a long way to go there.
We need informed decisions.
Absolutely.
After the break, I want to look at the future. Nation in Conversation will be back right after this. Welcome back. This is Nation in Conversation. Kobus, if you look at the future in terms of the demands of customers, if I take a 5, 10, 15-year view, how do you see those trends develop?
Transparency is going to be the key. Our consumers, our customers, and I believe not only the Woolworths one, even the people that shop at your Spaza shop, they want to know, is it safe to eat this food? Is the people that in the chain that working there, are they treated well? Is it to the negative or positive of the environment? Are we using energy efficient, etc., etc.? Is the nutrition of the food where it should be? So transparency is going to be the key, and the one that's going to be first to have full transparency on all those aspects is going to be the one that wins.
Kobus, do you foresee a time when I will be able to look at what I'm buying and detect from that, from the label, where the animal came from, what it was fed on, and perhaps what breed it was?
Definitely. Technology is available, QR codes, etc., where you can use your smartphone and you scan it and all that information will be on there. You can even give feedback to the retailer on what you've read on that information, what you got on your smartphone, to give them a better understanding of what you're looking for. I think in a couple of years that will be the standard.
So everybody will need to adapt to more information, transparency and traceability. That will become key.
Definitely. That will make the consumer wanting to buy your product, because then they will feel good to eat your product.
Darby, we talked about the Spaza shops, but do you foresee that we will be in a position where we'll still be placed for smaller, perhaps specialized shops, or perhaps shops on the farms, but where there will be other specialized outlets rather than the big retail stores?
I think South Africa can be considered as two economies in one. So there's definitely space for the larger retailers that are more focused on volume, but there's also room for your smaller, more specialist stores. For your lower income consumers, of course, price is still a big concern, and you need economies of scale, you need the volume, and that will continue for some time. But then we also have this rapid move into the middle class, where people want to get closer to the producer, as we've seen in Europe. You know, they want to know, where was this piece of corn produced? What does the farmer look like? What is his family like? And I think we're seeing a lot of that, and we'll continue to see that. But I think there's still room for both types of players until we can get a more even society.
Is our retail chain adaptable enough to a new consumer, to the changes in the consumer in terms of the income, in terms of the behavior, in terms of food preferences? Are we adaptable enough?
I think they don't have a choice to adapt. The consumer is going to make more and more informed decisions. And if the consumer don't like what they see on your shelf, they're not going to buy your product. So you've absolutely got no choice.
You, from a Woolworths point of view, or rather from your personal view, is there space for small specialized retailers in the South African market?
I definitely think so. Us living in Cape Town, if you look on the weekends on those small farm shops and organic markets, they're flooded with people. And still the big retailers survive, and they do make good business. So I think I agree with Darby that there's going to be, we definitely have a dual economy, and there's space for both of them.
Darby, just a point in terms of the future. South Africa is an urbanized population. We're urbanizing very rapidly. That means there's more demands on the farmer, but there's also more demands on getting the food to the farmer. If you, and Kobus alluded to, there is opportunities. From your side, what would you advise to a Spaza shop or Spaza shop owner be to say, I need to stay relevant. There is an opportunity, but I need to stay relevant. What is the aspect that is of importance to that person?
I think it's important to identify what the niche market is. Gone are the days where you can just be generic in the market. You need to identify what your specific and special role is, what the gap in the community that you're trying to serve is. And I think there's definitely a lot of speciality needs that are very difficult for your bigger producers and your bigger retailers to cater to. And I think spaza shops need to step into that role and not necessarily try to compete with big retailers on a vast majority of goods.
And that'll mean that they will have to bring a specific product to their specific community and know their community.
Exactly.
Do we have spaza shops that is making that transition?
I think you are. You have, your corner stores with, the old lady selling fit cook on the corner because that's what's required. And those are quite popular. So you do get small pockets of excellence where people have identified that niche, but it needs to be escalated on a much bigger scale.
And that could be part of the job creation in the market.
Absolutely. There's a lot of potential there, and small businesses really are the future.
If you look to the future, what do you see?
Me personally, what I see in the future is a small town with the local baker buying the wheat from the local farmer, producing for the people, but also there's space for the bigger retail that gives that choice of customers that do have the choice. So yes, you have your specialty small shop, but you also have your bigger retailer in town to serve the community.
But that specialty shop cannot only try to compete with the retailer. There'll have to be a specialty element that the community is looking for that perhaps a big retailer cannot do.
Exactly, yeah. That niche market, as Tabi alluded to.
So the challenge and the opportunity for entrepreneurs is find that niche market, develop that. They will be there. Retailers are not going to do everything for everybody. Thank you very much. Please join the conversation. You can visit our website, nationinconversation.co.za, or on Twitter @NationConverse. Until next week, from me, Theo Foster, goodbye.
Nation in Conversation, proudly brought to you by AFGRI, Fort Knox, Hinterland, Monsanto, Nedbank, NWK, and Sendes.
The world is changing today. The world is changing in every way. Let's stand together, put our hands together, join hands forever. We're making it better. No matter where you are, you could be near or far away. We're singing together.